It's 2023, I got my old man sweater on, and I'm riled up. As you may know from other videos on this channel, I have done all of my Korean language learning here in the city of Busan, South Korea. In this part of the country, people speak very differently. When you get a handful of locals together and they really get to chatting, it can sound like a different language compared to the Korean you're probably familiar with. When I was still a beginner at Korean, I was still in the early stages of acquiring the language, I had a really hard time finding any kind of materials online that explained what people around me here in Busan were saying. All educational materials for the Korean language are based on the artificial government-created version of the language that is based on the Seoul dialect of Korean. So why am I riled up right now, you ask? Well, I've been working on a project designed to help teach people how to understand this expressive and unique version of the Korean language for over a year now. And whenever I talk about it with others, I'm kind of shocked by the takes that people have whenever I discuss this with them. People really downplay the importance of this version of Korean, and they say stuff like, oh, I don't want to affect my Korean or sound like I'm from some specific region of Korea or whatever. I think that a lot of these takes, these like kind of uninformed or just misinformed takes on varieties of the Korean language stem from one thing. Content you can find about Busan Korean is kind of trash. Busan Satoori, or Gyeongsangdo Satoori, which is what this version of the language is called in Korean, is something that's, I think, misunderstood by like everyone. Korean language learning content creators, Korean learners for sure, and then just a lot of people who live in the capital area, live in and around Seoul, just like don't get it. I think all of this is really damaging to Korean learners and also just like the general culture of learning Korean. So I think it's really important that we clear it all up. Let's talk. If you've spent any time in the YouTube Korean learning content ecosystem, which you're here right now, so I'm assuming you have, you've definitely come across some kind of video talking about the Busan dialect. There are a few different types of content that get made about this, but in general, there's two types of content. One type of video has a couple of people, or just people from Gyeongsangdo only, sitting down and then like somebody in the middle having them say stuff in their regional dialect. Say like, oh, can you say this in your dialect? And then every time someone says something, the standard speaker in the middle goes, wow, oh my God, I can't believe blah, blah, blah. Either that or it's someone from this region just kind of giving like no context phrases from this version of the language. I'm not trying to single out any creators on the very off chance that they're watching this. I'm not trying to start a fight or anything here. I just think that this kind of content is like really cringe. It's lazy and it's reductive. Anyway, I'm not trying to start a fight here. I won't go into any more details about what I'm talking about. It doesn't really matter. I'm just talking about the type of content that displeases me. I do, however, think that most of the content, like almost all of the content made about this topic, is lazy, and it does a disservice to the people who are learning about Korean from it. Not only is the information in these types of videos often incorrect, but the videos usually just parrot the same like 3 or 4 stereotypical features of this version of Korean that people who speak Seoul Korean know come from the Southeast, and things that those people think are exotic or different. So for now on this channel, I want to talk about Busan Satoori. Things about it that are interesting to me, things about it that are on my mind. So in this video, I'm going to talk about a few of the main things that speakers of standard Korean know about the dialect and why I think they stick. Maybe you've run into some of these without even knowing. So first off, what is Busan Satoori? So calling something a language or a dialect is largely a political thing. There are a few different ways that scholars have tried to differentiate languages from dialects, try to clear the whole thing up. But in general, when you hear academics talking about different dialects of the language, what we would call a dialect, they usually use the word language variety or some variation of that. What makes this even more confusing is that in English, the word that we usually use that means dialect is accent. So it all kind of gets confusing. So if you hear me saying dialect sometimes, version of Korean, variety of Korean, accent, blah, 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 just understand that these are all the same thing. Later on, if we really get into the weeds, I'll be more clear about what accent actually means, like in a linguistic sense, because that's super important for this version of Korean, but I digress. All of that being said, the important thing here is that 경상도 사투리, Busan Satori, the Busan dialect, the southeastern dialect, this version of Korean is the most other thing spoken in Korea, except for, the unfortunately nearly extinct Jeju language, but we'll leave that out for now. 경상도 사투리's otherness is something I'll talk about in the next video I make in this series. I've got a cool study that kind of gives an example of how people think about it, but that's for the next video. Let's talk about a few of the features of this version of Korean that speakers of standard Korean feel are super exotic, enough so that they've become kind of memes among, Korean speakers. I think that the very first thing that speakers of standard Korean will point out about this version of Korean as being different is the intonation, and more specifically, tones. Yes, you heard me correctly, tones. This topic is really hard to cover all at once, so I'm gonna give you a super short version. Modern Korean dialects all descended from a common language that we now call Middle Korean, or 중세 국어, 중세 한국어. This language was what Sejong Daewang would have spoken, what Lee Sun-shin would have spoken, so on. This was Korean, languages for several hundred years in this category. This language was tonal, meaning that each syllable had its own pitch contour. Other well-known tonal languages are ones like the Chinese languages, Vietnamese, Thai, and even Yoruba in Nigeria. As time went on, the tone system of Middle Korean evolved into a few different things in different areas that spoke the language. In the middle of the peninsula, it was replaced with the long and short syllables you may have heard of before. East of the Taebaek Mountains, though, it transformed into something we now call pitch accent. You heard of that before? That's a whole thing too, so I'll simplify it for now to this. 경상도 사투리 uses pitch in words to differentiate them from one another. So let's come back to some of the stereotypical phrases that they know that exemplify this difference. The first one is a pretty big meme. Ka. Yeah, that's right. Ka is a full sentence. You can even go like totally buck wild with the ka's and say something like ka. But here's the thing. You wouldn't. Buffalo is a sentence in English, but it's not like a thing we go around saying, at least I don't think it is. Imagine if every time you said you spoke English, someone went, oh, buffalo. Another one is this whole thing around yi and e. The number 2, yi, has a low tone, and the letter e has a high tone. So things like 2 squared, or 2 to the e power, are differentiated by pitch to 경상도 사투리 speakers. So 2 squared would be 예이승. 2 to the e power would be 예이승. Cool, but not really like a thing people talk about. So pitch is super important for people down here for differentiating what people are saying and following along with someone's speech. Unfortunately, that doesn't really make its way up to Seoul. I think that this sticks out to them because it's something that they've heard someone say, or it's something weird to them that's a really clear example of a difference in language that's still comprehensible to standard speakers, but not something that they're familiar with. So 경상도 사투리 and 표준어, the standard version of Korean that's, most commonly used in media and writing and all of that stuff, are largely mutually intelligible. People can understand each other even if they're speaking in, their own version of the language. That being said, standard Korean speakers cannot really access the information, the comprehension information that's carried in those pitches. They just kind of ride the wave of mostly understanding what each other are saying and think of that pitch stuff, that sing-songiness, as just a quirky difference in the language. But it's not. It's super important. Another example of this is how it shows up on TV. I've got a couple of clips here of celebrities on 예능 programs. Maybe I'll just show the screenshot so I don't get copyright strikes. But they just show in general that the intonation of people from this part of the country is interesting and exotic. So I think that this is kind of why these obscure phrases stick, because they're really clear examples of how this pitch thing works. The other two examples I want to share today are connected but separate in other ways. So the first one is the following phrase, 밥 묻나. In standard Korean, this would be 밥 먹었어? We can break this down as 밥, 묵었, which gets shortened to 묻, and then 나 as the yes or no question marker. Seoul speakers know this phrase is a greeting in the South, but they don't know much more about how the grammar works. The second one is no. This is the complementary particle to 나. No is used for open-ended questions. That's right, 경상도 사투리 specifically says whether a question is a yes or no question or an open-ended question. Seoul speakers either just conjugate the verb normally and use a little bit of intonation to specify which type of question they're asking, or they use the neutral ni, like 밥 먹었니, which we don't even have in 경상도. So this na and no thing is kind of interesting to Seoul speakers, but they pretty much always use it incorrectly. Sentences that end in no can actually cause Satoori speakers some trouble when they're typing on the internet or posting things online due to the fact that it's very similar looking to some kind of in-group lingo used by some nasty online communities. They are not related though. I think that the reason that speakers of Seoul Korean are able to and do pick up on these two particles, na and do, for questions is because they don't know how to use them. They sound interesting and exotic and different, but they don't really block comprehension if you're able to understand everything else that the person is saying. So there are a few stereotypes or memes or just things that speakers of standard Korean know come from the southeastern region of Korea, the Gyeongsangdo Satoori, the Busan Satoori, the dialect, the variety version of Korean, whatever you want to call it. They are intrigued by the tonality of the language, and they pick up on the interesting grammar that makes it sound different from Seoul Korean. But there is a lot more to the way that people express themselves and communicate down here. Gyeongsangdo Satoori not only provides a window into the past of the Korean language, it provides an interesting alternative to the Korean that you'll hear in most other places. Like I said before, in the next video, I'm going to talk about an interesting study that I found that discusses the linguistic perceptions of Gyeongsangdo and Gyeongsangdo Satoori that Korean speakers from other places have of this version. I'll talk about what their perceptions are, why they think those things, what that says about Satoori, and just the general relationship between this version of Korean and the rest of Korean. Nothing too serious though, don't worry, it's interesting. So, are there any interesting 경상도 사투리 stereotype, meme things that you know about that I didn't mention in this video? Please let me know in the comments. If you're interested in learning more about 경상도 사투리, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I'm in the end stages of a project I've been working on for a very long time that should clear up all of the misunderstandings and kind of illuminate the darkness around Satoori. Somewhere between like 20 and 30 something % of Korean speakers in South Korea speak this version of Korean. So learning how to understand people who speak this way will increase your ability to connect with people, understand media, and just generally broaden your understanding and deepen your understanding of the Korean language and the people who use it. If you'd like to stay in the loop about this project's release, just head over to my website, koreanpatch.co, join my mailing list for free, and you'll get all the updates on when the project's coming out and how to participate and all that good stuff. It's easy, it's free, head on over there, let me know if you have any problems. All right, that's enough for today's video. That's all I got to say right now. I will see you in the next one.